For the United States in assisting the nations of the Persian Gulf.
There are those that would like to lift the sanctions. I am not among them.
Our main objective is lifting the sanctions, which has been very, very cruel on our people.
Why do you think Americans want to keep the sanctions?
That's their policy.
Why do you think?
Let's ask them. That's their policy. It's against the will of the international community. It's against the will of many other countries. I think they are making profits from that. But I don't want to make accusations.
Financial profits?
Yes.
Like how?
Who is selling oil instead of Iraq? Iraq had a share in the oil market. That share was stopped by the sanctions. Who is selling that?
Who?
They know very well that Saudi Arabia jumped from 5 million barrels a day to 8 million barrels a day. 3 million barrels, Iraq's share, have been added to the share of Saudi Arabia.
And we would take this to a war front to protect Saudi Arabia's making more money?
No, you are sharing that money. Everybody knows that.
Before the sanctions, Iraq used its $20 billion in annual oil exports to import 70% of the country's food and medicine. The cutting off of Iraq's oil by the Security Council has caused widespread hunger.
Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited by international law. The sanctions are a violation of the Geneva Convention, the United Nations Charter, the Constitution of the World Health Organization, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Charter of Economic Rights and Duties of the States.
It's not France, it's not Russia, it's the United States which is imposing these sanctions, which are killing their children by the hundreds of thousands. And we believe that the right policy for the United States government is to stop the sanctions, and that the people of this country who are having our tax dollars used to impose hunger and starvation are not really being spoken for in this current crisis.
But the UN has backed these sanctions.
Well, the United Nations for the last 6 or 7 years has become virtually a plaything for U.S. policy, and that's because of U.S. dominance in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union. That doesn't mean that the people of the Middle East or the people of the world really support U.S. policy.
Today's march that we're beginning now is a procession to commemorate the more than 500,000 children in Iraq who have died from the sanctions policy, a policy that's so linked. The growing hunger here in the U.S. is reflected 1,000 times in the starvation of more than 1 million people who died in Iraq.
I think it's very important that each one of you came out here today and to keep in touch with us and to raise your voice, to show your faith, to stand and walk with the Iraqi people. We are thousands of miles away from them. But when I was in Iraq, I felt so desperately. I wanted to call the United States, and I wanted to say, sisters and brothers, organize a demonstration now. Get together, even if it's 25 people, even if it's 10 of us. Show that we are here in the United States, that they have friends here who do not believe in the extermination of the Iraqi people, that they have friends here who say...
The International Action Center has launched a major medical aid campaign to deliver medical supplies to the people of Iraq. Essential medicines and supplies can save the lives of many, many people. We are asking everyone who sees this video to join in making the Medicine for Iraq campaign a success.
Well, we all know, don't we, the reasons why the United States intervened in the Gulf the way we did. In the end, killing between 100,000 and 200,000 Iraqis, as opposed to 303, I think, Americans killed either in combat or in combat-related accidents. And we certainly have restored to power the legitimate authority in Kuwait. In fact, we've done it applying that age-old, all-American political principle of one man, one vote. In this case, one man, the emir, one vote, his. We heard Bush back in August, didn't we, at the very beginning saying that our way of life was at stake. And we had to do something about that invasion of Kuwait. We also heard, didn't we, besides the way of life was at stake, we had to intervene to protect the access to the energy resources of the Persian Gulf. Another one was that we had to stop naked aggression. What we did not get are alternative interpretations of the events that occurred. And that's what I want to speak about here tonight. It's my opinion that the United States needed an international crisis, an international threat, to replace the crisis in Europe that largely disappeared with the collapse of communism and the chaos in the Soviet Union. Why? In order to keep the permanent war economy going, to justify continuing the situation wherein well more than 50% of the federal budget goes to military purposes. Well, this means that the military expenditures in the United States are the motor of the U.S. economy, and they have been that ever since about 1950. It's worth reviewing the history because that's where this crisis, I think, comes from, this sought-for, needed crisis. In early 1950, there was extreme worry at the highest levels of the Truman administration that the United States was likely to return to the conditions of the Great Depression of the 1930s. And so early in 1950, the decision was taken that this domestic economic problem was going to be solved through militarism. That is, through rearmament in the United States and through U.S. financing of the rearmament of Western Europe, particularly Western Germany. The document which provides the analysis of the world at that time and the U.S. place in the world and the internal situation in the United States was top secret for 25 years. In 1975, it was accidentally or through error released and published. It is known as NSC 68. It was written by NSC, standing for National Security Council. It was written by Paul Nitze, and it is a very detailed document. The main operative conclusion, though, was this. This is a quote from the document. The United States and other free nations will, within a period of a few years at most, experience a decline in economic activity of serious proportions unless more positive governmental programs are developed. Well, the solution adopted, those more positive governmental programs, was expansion of the military. But Truman could not get this program through Congress at first. There was opposition there and public opposition to the enormous new taxes that this program would require. He went on national radio, declared a state of national emergency, and said what Bush's remarks about our way of life being at stake reminded me of. He mustered all the hype and emotion he could, and Truman said, among other things, he said, "Our homes, our nation, all the things that we believe in are in great danger. This danger has been created by the rulers of the Soviet Union." In his speech, he also called for massive increases in military spending for U.S. and European forces, quite apart from the needs in Korea. Well, there was no threat from the Soviet Union. They were still rebuilding from the rubble of World War II, in which they had lost 20 million people. They were no threat, but they were manufactured from 1950 on, from the time of Korea on, as a grave threat to the United States. And that became the justification for this program, which Truman, through manipulation of the Korean War, had been able finally to get through Congress. The result was that in the first 2 years, that is the 2 years between 1950 and 1952, the U.S. military budget more than tripled, from $13 billion in 1950 to $44 billion in 1952. And during the same 2-year period, U.S. military forces doubled to 3.6 million people under arms. This was the beginning of the permanent war economy in the United States. The Korean War, by the way, went on for 3 more years after it could have ended. In the end, 34,000 U.S. were dead, more or less, more than 100,000 wounded, and the total casualty count was in the millions.